We've got every cup. We've got every mug. Turn yours around so you can see.
Well, then I can't drink out of it.
Well, turn the lid. Good gracious, what's your IQ?
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Welcome to Classical Etc. I am Paul Schaefer.
Why are you first?
I just assumed I was going to be the temporary host again.
What made you make that assumption?
What Martin said last time, that he would like me to be the
temporary host.
Permanent temporary host.
Yeah.
Would you like to start, Tanya?
No, I was just curious why you started.
Oh, okay, you could take it away.
I'm Tanya Charlton.
And who are you?
I'm Martin Cawthorn.
All right, good. We all know our names. Today, we are going to be talking about how we went about selecting our literature books in our curriculum. But I have been preparing all week to tell Martin that I have been reading an Alexander Dumas book, The Black Tulip.
The Black Tulip.
Another Dumas.
Now, is this because I noticed on Audible, there's a whole bunch of sequels to the Three Musketeers.
No, this is not a sequel.
Okay, this is a separate one?
The Three Musketeers, you have 20 years later, which is the next book, and then there's the Vicomte de Bretagne, the Viscount of Brittany, I think.
I don't know.
I don't know what the English.
I don't know what the English is
of that. But I haven't actually read those sequels of The Count of Monte Cristo. Mm-hmm. But The Black Tulip is actually a fairly thin book, and it I think was his last historical novel, and it is set in the tulip craze in the Netherlands in the 1600s.
Why did you think of me? Because I had mentioned the tulip
because
craze.
You don't like the Three Musketeers.
Because you don't like Three Musketeers. Or rather, you liked it, but you had to trudge through it. Or I don't know what your actual...
I thought it was because of the tulip thing, because Bitcoin, what's the generic term for... cryptocurrency.
Thank you.
Cryptocurrency. Every time somebody brings up cryptocurrency, I think of the tulip craze, because it's just so... It's a great analogy to what, where everyone starts to value something that doesn't really have the value that because they just went crazy on tulips and they were hugely expensive. And then the bottom fell out of the market. And of course, this is exactly what we saw with cryptocurrency.
And which we've seen with all kinds of things.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But the tulip craze, that's always been kind of the analog to all those kinds of things where the market just values something way above its real value.
Yeah, but it's I enjoyed it. I mean, I read it in less than a week.
Is there such a thing in nature as a black tulip?
Well, no. The whole like driving force of the book is that one of these like consortiums for the tulips in the 1600s gives a 100,000 florin prize. I assume it's like dollars, right? And so their currency for anybody who can develop a black tulip.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because it is not something that's found in nature. And so you have a guy who's working on it, and then his neighbor's jealous, and he gets thrown in prison. It's a whole thing. As
long as it's shorter than the Three Musketeers.
Significantly
that's
shorter.
A recommendation right there.
But did you like it?
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
It was great. And I think there's things like in The Count of Monte Cristo, I don't recall Dumas ever making like aside points about the morality or ethics of certain things. But in this book, he does. It was really interesting because he would make it so short that he kind of felt like he had to put that in there because he didn't have the time to weave it into the whole story. But I greatly enjoyed it.
Because Hugo does that. I noticed in Les Miserables, he'll go off on these side tangents explaining some aspect of society or something, which people complain about. And I found at least as interesting as the narrative.
Yes, but those side tangents can be long.
They're long. They're very long.
Whereas this, I'm talking about like he might have a paragraph there about the way Providence works or the way I thought it was really good. It's really good. I would recommend it.
Okay.
So, Tanya, what are you reading?
It's the same. It's okay. I've got probably 120 pages left of Demon Copperhead. I've said this on how many podcasts now? Because I just can't get it finished. But I'm close, and I'm my opinion of it is the same right now. It may be different next week after I finished it, but right now it's the same. But I'm also reading The Reading Life by C.S. Lewis, which is the book that we're giving the faculty. And so I just wanted to make sure it was still, that it was okay. I'm sure it is.
Sure.
But, and then I'm reading Winnie the Pooh, because we're getting ready to publish a study guide for Winnie the Pooh. So I need to reread the book so I can help go back through the study guide and make sure it's what we want it to be. So I am reading other things, but Demon Copperhead is still...
That's kind of your major
it's the
thing
one
right
I'm
now.
trying to get through.
When you finish Demon Copperhead, have you decided what you're going to read? Are you going back to War and Peace?
Oh, I feel like I don't want to go back to War and Peace during Christmas. So I may wait until after Christmas to go back
British
to
murder mysteries?
Maybe so. Something very light, because my husband is a minister and Advent is very difficult.
Yes.
But this is our last Advent as ministers. And then next Advent, I may not do anything but sit in a chair and read.
That's
no activities
that's my
at
dream
all.
right there. Yeah.
So I don't know.
So,
but maybe a murder mystery. I haven't read one for a bit.
We'll check in.
Okay.
We gave you enough grief about that recently at some point.
You did last week. Was it last week?
It may have been the podcast that actually didn't. We didn't.
Oh no!
Didn't get the audio on.
Okay.
So,
well, if it was, you did give me grief.
Yeah. Well, one day we'll convince you to read something other than murder mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
Why? But why? I do read other things, but that's my choice. That's my choice. I think it was last week.
I shouldn't really be talking because I've really dove headfirst into some modern popular audiobook that I'm not going to deign to mention. Martin, what are you reading?
Well, here's my problem. We've just recently moved, and I have about 100 to 120 boxes of books. And I tried to take out the ones I thought I would need separately and move them up and, so that they're easy to get to. And of course, none of the books I need are in those books. They're all in these boxes. I do not know which ones they're in yet. And I'm just, I'm having to build bookshelves in the new house to house some of these things. So I haven't gotten them out yet. And
you can't find anything.
I can't find the ones I need.
When you put them up, you should have organized them in the boxes.
Well, I know where they came from. They're marked because we had to hire people to box them.
You had that many books?
Yes.
Where were they? Were they on bookshelves?
Well, yeah, I had some in my library.
But were they in some kind? Were they in an order?
In an outbuilding? Huh?
Were they in any kind of order?
They were, but they weren't marked in order. It would have been just as much trouble for me to box the books, as to tell people.
Yeah, you used to come after you would clean out your garage. You would come bring me old books and say, "We should think about publishing this."
Yes, right. I got more coming. Yeah.
So what you're saying, Martin, is that the time that you would normally devote to reading, you've been devoting to organizing your books.
Well, that's a little bit true. Yes. But. No, the time I have spent moving the last 2 months, and when you move out of a house that's 25 years old,
there's a lot of stuff
there, and there's stuff you say, in the stuff you completely forgot about, and all this business. So it's just that I have for writing and stuff, I have needed my reference in a book that I now cannot find, and it's really aggravating. So I'm trying to get up these bookshelves as soon as I can, so that I can get at these books. But for work, Dan and I. Have had on the schedule for our podcast at Memoria College, our Dust Jacket podcast. We want to do From Dawn and Decadence by Jacques Barson.
Oh yes, that's on my list too.
Yeah, and I have that out so that I can get to, and I've started reading it again, and it just I have read like probably half of it before, and I'm going back through it, and those books that are. You've read them before, but you go back through and it's like, I don't remember this.
Right.
And so, my theory is that you could read a book, a good book like this, and then go back and immediately start over, and it would appear like a new book.
It's true.
It's
true. I think that's true of just about anything, not something as simple as a British murder mystery. But I do think for more difficult, like when I reread a book like Mere Christianity, I find all kinds of new things. I mean, it's familiar, but I really do. Part of it, I think, is the perspective that you're coming at it maybe from a different perspective, a different age. But part of it is just there's so much. So you like it again? Oh,
absolutely.
It's worth reading.
It's one of those necessary. If you want to understand Western civilization, this is another book. If I'm putting my list together of the 10, 20 books that you need to read to understand Western civilization, this is one of them.
Oh, wow.
Right, very, very much so. In fact, one of the things we need to do, write this down, we need to do a show on what books would you read again?
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
You should read again, because then we would all go back.
Are you now the secretary too?
Apparently, he told me write it down. This is it's a rare episode where I actually have paper in front of me. Yeah. So
he's always telling me what to do. I'm going to tell him
books? What was it?
What books would you read
again
that you
would reread?
Would you read again? I think that'd be and this is definitely one of them. And the thing about, I have talked about Barzun on this podcast before, and have said that he is one of those essential education writers. He writes a lot on education, and then just writes history and intellectual history and all these other things. And he also wrote books on how to write clearly, and he practices that. He's such a good writer. It's just crystal clear.
Well, I need to get that back out after I finish War and Peace.
Yes.
Have you restarted War and Peace?
No, I went and read The Black Tulip, partly because I wanted to take a dig at Martin, and partly because it's what my wife gave to me for St. Nick's Day. And so, yeah, I was thinking I was going to pick that up again.
Are you going to read it over Christmas break? It just doesn't feel like a Christmas break book to me.
I am very scared that I'm not really going to have much time over Christmas break at all.
Oh, yes.
And so I might, that's where I'm going to have to see, like, if I think I'm actually going to have time, I would do War and Peace, because I just want to crank it out.
Right.
I don't want it to drag on for months and months. So
I'm afraid we're going to drag it on.
But the weather has changed. We have, it's cold enough now to have fires in our fireplace. My wife likes the house cold, so it's got to be really cold to have a fire in the fireplace.
Oh, you mean, okay.
And so, like, if it's 40s, I can't light a fire.
Oh my gosh.
It has to really be cold.
Well, I've gone from a wood stove, which, you got to get the wood, you've got to chop the wood, you've got to bring the wood in, you've got to start the fire, you got to a button that I push.
Oh, for a gas?
Gas fire in the new house. And it's really, I have a wood furnace type thing outside. It's a brick.
Like a pizza oven kind of thing?
Yeah. Okay. Which is really cool. Then that satisfies my need for a wood fire.
Okay, because you do know those gas fires where you push a button are fake, right?
They actually they will pump out some heat.
They pump out
some heat. Oh no, they do pump out heat. And in fact, the ones that one we have is supposed to be very fuel efficient and everything. But it is, Brian said, at the old house that they lived in before, the one Brian Lowe, the one house they lived in before, they had a gas stove. And at the new one, they have the wood fireplace. And he says, we've done the wood fireplace maybe 4 or 5 times. Whereas with the gas stove, it was on every night.
Right.
And there's truth to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
But what I have found, now I do the wood fireplace. I like the wood fireplace. I have lots of wood that I have access to. But when we light that fire, it really, because the whole house starts to get colder, then that room becomes the room you want to be in.
Right.
It's a thermostat.
That's right.
Right. And so what we will do, and the only things, like, that room is only set up with nice chairs for reading. It is, and Sarah can do a puzzle, but we're not going to be watching anything there. We're not going to be playing games. It's reading. So if you want to be warm, you're going to be reading. It's actually quite nice.
That is nice.
You have to be warm when you're reading. Mm-hmm. And that is, when we were looking at houses, there's several questions. Well, there's one basic question I asked myself, which is, where can I be comfortable in this house? Where do I see myself sitting down and reading a book or whatever? And in this house, it's beside that fireplace. There's the hearth, right? My front, when the weather's warm, there's the front porch, and then there's the back porch, and I could see myself being comfortable in any of those spots.
That's really important. But you know what? We need a moderator because we're
totally off. But I am just so appalled by you using a button to start your fire. Anyway,
it does bother me.
It does seem un-Martin-like, doesn't it?
Yes. Okay.
I mean, we could just.
Where do you read? This is another good. Write that down.
We already covered that. We covered that just now. Where do you read?
No, there's more to talk about that.
I have places that I read.
And I'm gonna move us on.
Okay, but you don't know. You don't want to know where I read.
Sure.
Where do you read, Tanya? Here.
Thank you, Martin.
Where do you read?
I read on my sun porch, which is air conditioned and heated.
Yeah.
So now I read on the screen porch in the summer, but I read on the sun porch the rest of the year. And every morning at 5, I read on the sun porch, or I read in bed, but that doesn't go well because I'm so tired at the end of the day that I don't last very long, and then I fall asleep.
So half the year when you're reading though on your sun porch, you're in the dark, or more than half the year.
Oh, more than half the year because I get up at 10 till 5. So it's really a month that, I mean, it's dark. It's always dark. Now, when I go out to walk, I have about a month in June when it gets light as I'm walking at 5:30.
But you read, then you walk.
Yes. Yes, because I have my coffee first. So I read for half an hour and then I start my day. Okay. But on the screened in porch, I just have to turn the light on. So I'm just lit up in my neighborhood on my screened in porch. I just only person up.
I don't go out to my sunroom unless there's light. It doesn't feel.
Oh no, I have to turn the lights on.
It just doesn't feel without the sun out. It doesn't feel like I'm in the right spot. But that's just me.
Where do you read? Oh, by your fire.
I read by the fire.
You've got a specific room for reading.
Now in the summer, I will go out. I'll go more out to the sunroom because it'll be dark until I go, or it'll be light until I go to bed.
Well, my sunroom, literally, I mean, the only thing in it is a bookcase, the chaise that I read on, and a little table for 2 people where I could do a puzzle or we eat out there some. Yeah. But that's all that's in there. So it really is
like
dedicated.
A dedicated space.
Yes.
You drink coffee when you read?
Yes.
I do too.
I do.
I drink coffee.
In the morning, not at night.
I drink coffee.
Yes, I know you do. I know you do.
Okay, well, let's move on. Since Tanya says we need to have a moderator. So today...
I'm just thinking the 3 of us together is probably not efficient.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we won't have themes ever again. We'll just
chat.
Meander.
Well, that's what it is in the office, right?
It is. So, speaking of the office, we have made literature selections for our curriculum.
Yes, we have.
Now, I could ask this question directly to Tanya, but I would actually rather ask this question to Martin.
I would rather ask any question of me.
Oh, please. But who wants to hear your answer?
See, Tanya's the curriculum director, so she should know this. But Martin, I'm curious what you would say if somebody asked how we went about choosing what literature we put in what grade.
Were you there when we actually made the selections? Yeah,
well,
I'm the one.
That's interesting that you asked me that because she changed it every single year. She would come to me and say, this is the final curriculum. Yeah. Cheryl Lowe, this is the final curriculum. And then the next year she'd come again and I just finally started stapling them one on top of the other and I would pull it out and say, okay, this is the final. And she would see the big stack where she changed something every year. And she would say, yes, this is the final. This is the final.
I remember coming to your desk a few years doing that.
Over and over. Yes, but she didn't change much. That's the thing. Is she really, we're still teaching the majority of the books that we're teaching now were in the very beginning. So no, I wasn't there when the very first final curriculum was. Right,
so back to me.
Were you there?
So what was the rationale? How'd y'all make that decision? Were you part of that decision or were you just there?
I have no ideas. I'd ask Tanya.
Cheryl did it, but she read everything in the world.
Well, these were all, the books we picked, and in a way, I look at our curriculum and I think those are obvious picks. Well, who would not have that book in a curriculum.
Are we just talking literature or everything?
I was specifically focused on literature. But we've
That's what I was
established we can meander.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, who would not include Charlotte's Web?
Right.
And
that was a lot of her decision. Was there were books. We have this canon of literature that all students need to read so that they can have an educated conversation with other people who have read those books.
Right, and so in a way they chose themselves. I mean, Charlotte's Web, Little House on the Prairie, but there were some that were not obvious picks. What would you say was not an obvious pick?
Well, the Trojan War to me was not an obvious pick until I realized why she did it to prep the students, how important it was for them to know that story and to know the characters before they read Homer, because she was going to make them read Homer in the 7th grade. So that to me, the Moffats was not an obvious pick to me, but I just reread it recently and it is just such a gem, and it is so important, I think, in our curriculum.
Well, and
can you expound on why?
Well, it's just it's a charming little book, and the other 2 books in that year are country, Charlotte's Web and Farmer Boy, and then you get the Moffats, which is a small town community. It's about community and about a family that's struggling, but they are always cheerful and upbeat and optimistic. And it just is perfect for an 8 or 9 year old child.
Well, it was when people led real lives, and it was before the internet, and it was, people associated,
it was
people
all
socialized. Yeah. And, Cheryl used to talk about making sure that children understood the old neighborhoods that, and I've lived in one house that I would call a real neighborhood, where the kids are coming home from the school bus and they're playing out in the street and they're riding their bicycles and all that. So she loved the Betsy Tacy books.
Oh, I do too.
For that, partly because that was the old neighborhood.
Yes.
And I think the Moffats does that too.
It does, but on a higher level.
Yeah, on a higher level.
The thing about the Betsy Tacy books is they are charming also, but they are about such young children young children that couldn't read on that level yet, that they don't really fit except as a read aloud maybe.
Yeah, right. And we read them
very
aloud
young
to our kids. And my wife, those are among the books that she treasures the most, are the Betsy Tacy books.
I think so too. Yeah.
Well, on that note about sort of difficulty, I mean, does the Lexile level come into what we're doing?
It does. And she didn't check the Lexile level while she was choosing the books. But several years ago, she did go back and look through all of them and get the Lexile level. So she knew, especially for Storytime Treasures, which is why which
is 1st grade.
Yes. So she did make a few changes there, like she moved Ping to the end because it was such a higher Lexile level. So she did pay attention to it, but it really was after the fact.
And she was choosing things more for their content. And then saying, okay, when is the most appropriate time for a child to read this?
Yes.
Rather than saying, I'm looking for something for 1st grade, what 1st grade stuff is out there?
Absolutely. Because she needed to get this canon of books in. And so she had to figure out where to put them in order to do it. And like putting Robin Hood and King Arthur together and having, that the legend, the genre of legend, was important. Everything had a purpose and a reason, and it was all thought out over and over and over.
You bring up Robin Hood and King Arthur, and so I've got the question: do you, or why don't you, order your books so that each year deals with a particular historical period, and tying it to history? And I have always told people, I do not believe in that. We do it just sort of de facto.
That was
the Middle Ages.
That was a coincidence.
They all happen to be books written for a certain age.
That's correct.
You're far better. You're far better off in terms of what your kids need, of having them read books that are written for their age level, not some artificial history thing that you have imposed on your reading selections.
Well, and then you're going to lose your canon because you're going to be reading books that aren't as necessary. How many books are there
Right.
that are set in ancient Roman times that would be more valuable than Robin Hood or Charlotte's Web? So you would be paying a big price to stick those books in there. Now, my goal would be eventually to have a supplemental set of books that students could independently read. Like we have the American stories, American history little sets. It would be nice to have a little set because there are some good books, but they're not books that everybody will have read.
And they're not books that we're going to take dedicated literature class time
Absolutely.
to read those.
That's right. That's right. So that was a big part of it. And some of it we don't even study history chronologically. And there's a reason for that too.
Yeah.
Is because we're doing all the famous men books, but we're doing Rome first. And that was deliberate because back in the day everybody was doing history chronologically, and then you would repeat it chronologically, and then you would repeat it chronologically. And she never intended to do that because Rome, she said, was so much easier for students, and that if you're sticking Greek history in with young students first because it came first chronologically, then they're not going to get near as much out of it because it's not age appropriate for them. Roman history was very simple. It was one empire. It rose, it fell. The characters were noble in a way. Now, we do then go to the Middle Ages, which is chronological, but then we go back to Greece because we're getting ready to read Homer. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, there needs to be reasons other than pure chronology that you select them for a certain age.
Right.
And Cheryl was really... that was a big theme with her, so she wrote an article about it, and I titled it, "Why History is Not Chronological."
I should have known that was your title. That title has bugged me.
It was coming to mind when you were talking, Tanya, and I should have seen that coming too. But also, I think there's an educational point here too of that if your literature mashes up with your history. In that year, let's say you've got Greek history and your literature mashes up with that, you're never going to see anything that makes you call back to mind anything in the American history time period, right? Or anything in the medieval history time period. Whereas if your literature is set in different time periods in the history you're studying, then every year you're calling that back to memory, which is going to make it stick further, right? Rather than just saying we're going to cover this 3 times 4 years apart, but every year there's going to be something because we study stuff holistically.
If you do that and you're going to do everything chronological, then you're only going to get to American literature, which is very late in what, high school? I mean,
well,
you repeat.
No, it's every 4 years
because they would do ancient. Would they do Greece, Rome,
the rotation,
medieval, American?
Modern.
But still, there's going to be books that are written for a certain age that you're going to delay until the child is older.
Oh, sure.
And there are books that are not appropriate for a younger child.
Well, that's a big...
older child, you're going to have them reading at a time that they don't need to read those.
Content is really a big factor here.
Mm-hmm. And we have a whole lot more from like Renaissance and after to read than we do prior to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we are reducing the time we have to read, say the American modern stuff to only 3 years in our entire curriculum,
right,
you do not get to almost any of the important stuff.
Right. And then for middle school and high school, at that point, students are reading at a 13 plus level. They can read anything. So at that point, you really just have to make sure they're exposed to the authors they need to be exposed to in the canon of great literature. And a lot of those are British, but we also expose them to Russian literature and to American, but really the British lit is dominant there, just as Shakespeare, we're, doing Shakespeare from middle school all the way through every single year.
And I wanted to make a remark about the Lexile levels too, because you cannot slavishly follow that. I mean, they don't, it's not something like, John Steinbeck, for example, has a very low Lexile level. But what he's talking about is very mature.
That's right.
So you can't just take the Lexile level and say this.
You've got to be careful.
Yeah, very much so. And it's such a trap. I mean, I want to go off on standardized tests now, where parents will see my kid reads at a 13 grade plus level, and they just want to put anything in front of them.
Right. Turn them loose.
They can be 7th grade able to read that.
Yes.
And so you do have to be careful about that. But that's, and that's the difficulty of if you're trying to nurture your kids on good literature but they're a voracious reader, right? How do you filter that? You've got to
get some good book lists. You've got to get help from people like us who, are just immersed in it all the time and know pretty much. And then if somebody recommends a book to me, I'm going to read it before. Now, Martin keeps bringing me books and saying we need to publish this, and he's never read them. So I hand them back to him and tell him come back after he's read them. He never does.
But I also want to say, like, when we sometimes people say, oh, you only want your kids to read 4 books a year. No, we want them reading a whole lot more than that.
Because that's what we have in the curriculum.
That's right. That's what they're studying.
Yeah.
But they all of our kids have backpacks with their own book that they are reading. That is their own choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just, it's inculcating a habit in them of reading, which I think our curriculum helps to do.
Well, we're trying to teach them to contemplate what they've read.
Right, and to think about it, and to take it seriously. So I found, with my grandchildren, all of my grandchildren, and they started to read, like, before they were 1 year old, they were with books. They're around books.
Oh, yes.
And so I had my oldest grandson, who's 10 years old, goes here to school, and I'm putting out all my books on as I'm building the shelves, right? Well, he went down there, and I had all of my children's books are in the basement on the new shelves down there. And he came up, he said, "Can I arrange your books?"
Oh,
he was like really excited about it. He wanted to arrange these books. And I said, I said, "Well, what would you do?" And he says, and I said, "Yeah, I think you could do that." And he almost jumped up and down in joy that he was going to be able to arrange these books.
So how was he? What did he choose?
What do you mean?
Alphabetical, by genre?
I told him, I said, I told him how I wanted them arranged. I went by subject. So I got a lot of Westerns, and books about country life. And, so we settled on some subject distinctions, and within those subject distinctions, by the name of the author.
Okay.
And so this is like, he's having so much fun doing this. This is crazy.
So mine are American on one bookshelf, British on another bookshelf. What? Yes.
All murder mysteries.
Yes. The murder mysteries.
Yeah, murder mysteries is the one category.
No, the murder mysteries are all by themselves in a bookcase in my bedroom. But in the den is American in one bookcase, British in another, and then the other is like classical, like Homer, Thucydides.
Is all of this fiction? Or some of this nonfiction?
No, some of it is nonfiction. And then I've got a shelf that has everything, like the Russian, all the international, not British, not American, but everything else, Russian, the Silence book that was Japanese.
Yeah. When I finish my other bookshelves, I'm going to put the blue books in
Kristen Lavrenstad,
and the red books in another area, and the yellow books.
I know somebody that did that.
I'm sure you do.
Now y'all are making me feel bad.
Are yours organized?
Well, in the reading room, in what we call the library, the front room, living room, where we have our fires and read, on those shelves, I've got like a philosophy theology section, like a history section, a fiction section. I've got the main shelf actually is the great books, a complete set of the great books, and then I've got like a farming section, and then like the lower levels are the kids' books. But then once I read something, then I put it in the basement. And I have no organization in the basement. It's
wow! You need to get down there or send Soren.
I need to come up with some sort
Now, my theology is all together, regardless of nationality. But I've just got, a shelf of theology that has, Bible studies too and things from church.
Yeah.
But everything else is literally American, British, other. Well, and nonfiction, classical stuff.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with this. But anyway, do we have any other thoughts about how we choose our books?
Well, I mean, if somebody asks, like, how do you determine, and just in terms of quality, how do you determine whether a book is good?
Well, and we all have different opinions about that.
Right.
Like I don't, as I've made clear in the past, I'm not a big Tolkien fan. I'm not a fantasy genre fan, but I certainly recognize the value and the fact that he was a brilliant author.
Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, you have to take all of that in. You can't just say just because I don't like The Great Gatsby. I don't like Wuthering Heights.
That's a great point with regards to aesthetic appeal.
Right. But I absolutely see the value of them. And I've read Great Gatsby 3 times thinking, what am I missing?
Well, because I think this is why people will ask, like a homeschooling mother wants a list because she wants to know what you can't know because you haven't read them. So you have to rely on somebody else's authority.
And I did. But I also was in a book group with some really smart ladies when my kids were little. And we read all kinds of things. And I became, how many people still read Trollope? I'm a huge Trollope fan.
I am too, by the way. Yeah.
But people don't really read Trollope anymore.
That's
They're
Anthony
reading
Trollope, who was probably contemporaneous with Jane Austen, middle 19th century.
Dickens.
Yeah, Dickens era. And he writes about the life in the English countryside. And
he's kind of like George MacDonald, really.
Yeah, he's kind of, he's a little bit like, gosh, I had 2 authors, which I can't remember now. But they're very sort of, they take their time.
They're very rural.
They're large books.
Yes, they're very big. Yes.
Yeah, they're very big. Yeah, I'm a big Trollope fan.
Yeah.
But so you say your friends who were in this discussion group.
Oh, well, so we read quite a bit together. Mm-hmm. That was really, that really just opened our eyes to really good authors and good literature, because when you read with somebody, then you can do harder things better.
Right. And so you learned what books were good because your friends
and I had read right. And I had read and I mean one of them was Wendell Berry's daughter, so she had been forced to read a lot.
Yeah.
And so she also, kept mentioning books that we needed to read that were all very good.
Because, I'm looking at the bookshelves here, and we've got the Great Books of the Western World series, and those are works that have been passed down. People have read them over generations and generations, and so there's sort of a judgment of history on those books. We're relying on the authority of numerous generations back as to what is great, and that's about as good as you can get. But you get to more contemporary literature. Most children's literature has been written in the last 60, 70 years probably. And so we don't have that judgment for those. And yet there are certain classic works that have kind of risen to the top in an organic way. There was a book called Honey for a Child's Heart,
yes,
which had a list in the back. And that's probably of all the lists that we had, we relied most on that in terms of what literature to read.
You could trust it.
You could trust it. And now I think, we've gone and picked the best of the best for our curriculum, but there are all those other books.
There's so much more out there. That's absolutely.
Yeah. And so, do we actually have a list of the ones we recommend? Or
it's your list. We've got your list on our website somewhere. Good. I don't know where it is.
And we've got, I think, isn't it like we've got his list for boys, Lee's list for girls?
I don't know where those are, though. They're on our website somewhere.
Yeah.
And then
we will put them in the show notes.
Yeah. Right. Well, mine is Martin's Essential Boys book list. I know.
Well, but you've got a general list too that starts when they're little, that goes all the way up, that you used to tell people to email me to get.
Well, now that you reminded me of it, I'll tell them again.
No, please, no. Now it's on the website. They put it on the website because, especially the time you did it in a podcast, and people 3 years later will still asking me for your list. I could not believe you literally put my name out there with my email address in a podcast.
I thought that was pretty effective.
It was very effective for you.
I will say also, in regards to reading in literature, that one of sort of the hallmarks of what we do is we get out of phonetic readers very, very quickly.
Yes.
And that because we don't purely want our literature study to just be improving your Lexile level, improving your decoding ability, but we want you to actually start asking the question, now what of it? Right.
And we can do that because I think because of Cheryl's philosophy on phonics, that we needed to spend, people rush through and introduce a lot of things in kindergarten. And her theory was that if you spend 2/3 of your kindergarten year on short vowels and CVC words, that they are going to master those, and then everything else just comes easier and they don't hit a glass ceiling, and it works. Mm-hmm. So we can go into first grade reading Little Bear, which is an I Can Read It book. But then after that, Caps for Sale, Miss Rumphius, Make Way for Ducklings, just regular real books that are actual literature and not silly little phonetic stories.
Yeah. Well, I now have a list of podcast topics, authors that I've never heard of, like Anthony Trollope. And so I'm walking away with things to do and to read, and so hopefully we've
gotten an education.
I have gotten an education. Hopefully we've provided that to our listeners as well. Thank you. Thank you for watching this episode of Classical Etc. Please consider liking or sharing this video or commenting below to let us know what you thought. This has been Classical Etc. with Memoria Press. We'll see you next time.